In 1903, just 1 year after the peace treaty was signed, Colombia would receive an offer from Theodore Roosevelt, who wanted to rent their planned canal in Panama for 99 years in exchange for both annual and immediate payment. To this, the Colombian government profusely refused. The country was still reeling from the effects of the Thousand Days' War, and under such uncertain times, they were hesitant to sign away sovereignty over such a strategically important asset. The canal, however, was far from the only part of the nation up for grabs. In fact, over in Panama, many Panamanians were seeking complete independence from the country, in large part due to discontentment over the Colombian government's suppression of canal construction by foreign companies. Many also felt that their region was often neglected from national affairs and treated as a mere backwater by the government in Bogotá. Taking note of this tension, the US government, meanwhile, would use the region's desire for independence to their advantage, pledging to support Panamanian revolutionaries in their liberation in exchange for control of the canal. When Panama rebels forcibly declared independence in 1903, therefore, the US would station warships off Panama's coast so as to prevent suppression from the Colombian military. This strategy was ultimately successful and would see Panama become a republic that same year, while the US government gained control over the construction of the canal along with its operation upon completion in 1914. This loss was a huge humiliation for Colombia and fostered a resentment towards the United States that would linger for decades to come. In the following year of 1904, conservative Rafael Reyes, the former chief of staff of Colombia's national army, was elected as president. Reyes was known as a highly pragmatic leader, led by both his experience in the military and in international business. He ran on the mottos of peace, harmony, and work, and less politics and more administration, and strongly believed in the importance of industrial progress. He was also very open to working with liberals, a couple of whom he added to his cabinet, much to the dismay of some of his fellow party members. A few months into his presidency, Reyes received notice that the House of Representatives could not sustain its constitutional duties due to a lack of members showing up to meetings, following a boycott from the Liberal Party in the 1904 election. To this, Reyes closed Congress and called for an election of a constitutional assembly, which was voted in. The body of the assembly would consist of loyal conservatives and moderate liberals who supported Reyes' vision of modernization and strong executive power. This shift in politics would help consolidate a more centralized executive power within the government, setting a precedent for future leaders. During his time in office, Reyes made some drastic reforms and progress, such as significantly strengthening the Colombian peso, almost parrying the US dollar, restoring relations with Venezuela, creating a network of highways, and expanding the railway network. He also made a guarantee that minority groups would see greater representation in future elections. Perhaps most notably though, in a move to secure economic growth by introducing US companies into Colombia, Reyes would secure Boston's United Fruit Company to produce plantations of bananas in the department of Magdalena. This deal had grave ramifications as it granted the company huge influence over the region, including extensive land rights along with tax exemptions. Effectively, the company would operate as an autonomous state within a state, later leading to significant labor conflicts and exploitation, but more on that later. As mentioned earlier, tensions between Colombia and the US would persist throughout the era due to their hand in liberating Panama from the country. Reyes, however, would seek to quell these tensions via a treaty of reconciliation, something which was eventually accepted by the US but caused much protest in Colombia from both conservatives and liberals. Many viewed the treaty as a betrayal of national sovereignty and nothing less than a complete compromise. In an attempt to quell the escalating tension against him, Reyes quietly resigned. Still, the treaty offer would not be withdrawn. The Colombian government, in an attempt to speed the process along, would even attempt to exercise leverage over the US by cancelling their various concessions of petroleum. Around this same time, the US, perhaps in part due to the prospect of losing their Colombian oil supply, would propose another treaty that offered Colombia $25 million in exchange for acceptance of Panama's independence. Known as the Thompson-Urrutia Treaty, the deal was signed in 1914 but wouldn't be ratified until 1921. With a whole 7 years gone by, the money felt to many less like compensation and more like an obligatory act of diplomacy to restore relations between the countries. In the following year of 1922, Pedro Ospina Vázquez was elected as president. Ospina's presidency could largely be viewed as a part of a broader technocratic movement that was sweeping the continent at the time, where leaders seek foreign capital and expertise to help modernize and stabilize their economies. For Ospina specifically, this would involve rousing interest from the US for investments in Colombia, something of which he was very successful in. Many from the US came to invest in emerald and gold mines, sugar and banana plantations, and in oil. At the recommendation of the US Secretary of State, Charles Evan Hughes, Ospina also invited a US economist, Edward W. Kemmerer, as an advisor to improve the country's financial situation. Kemmerer, who would later become known as the Money Doctor due to his successes, would implement a number of transformative initiatives, such as founding a central bank that operated in the open market and advocating the strengthening of investor protections, aiming to bolster Colombia's image for Wall Street financiers. By the end of Ospina's presidency in 1926, he had achieved radical economic reform, bringing Colombia into the 20th century through some of the best financial management in all of Latin America. This, along with his aid in rousing a huge influx of investment from the US, which became known as the Dance of Millions, caused a huge economic boom in the country, giving way to a dramatic increase in infrastructural development, including railways and the first commercial airline in Latin America in 1919. With this boom also came the rise of a new urban middle class, particularly in major cities such as Bogotá, Medellín, and Barranquilla, which would see rapid expansion under the inflow of foreign capital. Later, in 1927, a trade association known as the Federación Nacional de Cafeteros, or Fedecafe, was formed to promote Colombia's coffee production and exports. Today, you may know this organization by their recognizable marketing campaign, Juan Valdez, a fictional character created as a label to denote coffee that's been 100% cultivated in Colombia. Even before the creation of the Juan Valdez brand in 1958, however, Fedecafe was hugely successful in promoting local coffee farmers. Soon after its inception, it would become a unified framework for thousands of growers, helping them to negotiate better prices and set vital quality control standards in the international market. Under Fedecafe, Colombia's coffee exports would triple within the first few decades of the 20th century, providing a lucrative source of income for many farmers. In 1932, a census reported that there were around 150,000 coffee farms in the country, also aided by a sudden increase in the country's population, many of whom would become farmers. Many of these farms were small, less than 25 acres, but these smaller plantations were still accountable for around 75% of crops. This influence of smallholder farming was a rare phenomenon in Latin America at the time, as it differed starkly to other countries where large estates often dominated the market. Both the coffee and population boom would also have negative effects, however. The rise of population, for one, would result in a deficiency of running water in major cities such as Bogotá, which at one point in the late 20s was only available to 5% of the population. Meanwhile, the coffee boom meant that many labourers and a large portion of the country's land were occupied for coffee exports, along with other exports driven by the country's sudden foreign investment, leaving little room for farmers to cultivate crops to feed their own population. The increasing number of rural Colombians displaced by the coffee industry's land occupancy, meanwhile, would then be forced to migrate to urban centres in search of work, thereby straining the infrastructure of the rapidly growing cities. With neighbourhoods becoming increasingly overcrowded and public health systems overwhelmed by the population boom, it wasn't long before serious diseases such as cholera, typhoid, and dysentery began to spread. At this point, the country would find itself in a serious health crisis, with figures showing an average of 1 in 5 infants dying within a year of their lives. Labour conditions and wages, meanwhile, were also terrible during this time. Many, including women and children, worked under abysmal conditions, in part due to the despotic nature of the US companies that often employed them, who were powerful enough to crush many of their labour rights. One such example of this was the Tropical Oil Company, or Troco, who operated under great impunity. Making matters worse was the blind submission of Colombian authorities, who were dependent on foreign capital and therefore didn't want to risk diplomatic fallout. For the workers of Troco, however, it was a different story. Discontent with such terrible work conditions and low wages, they eventually would decide to strike, only to be fired on by army troops. This incident in particular roused the attention of a now famous Medellín writer and journalist, María Cano. Spurring her to become a social activist, she would soon start a library where she'd conduct readings to raise awareness of cultural issues among labourers. In just a couple of years, Cano became hugely influential among workers across the country. This was in large part thanks to her numerous rallies, where she would represent the Revolutionary Socialist Party and demand for better working conditions. The Conservative government, however, saw her as a threat due to the tense fervour she'd ignited among labourers all over the country, and swiftly acted by passing a law that took away the individual rights of labour organisers. Still, in spite of this crackdown, Cano's speeches would continue to draw thousands of listeners, while her writings saw wide underground circulation. Meanwhile, one of Colombia's most famous labour organisation efforts, namely for the banana workers at the United Fruit Company in Ciénaga, Magdalena, would soon give way to one of the country's most historic massacres. In late 1928, 25,000 workers struck over low pay that often only took the form of vouchers for company stores, along with terrible work conditions that caused rampant diseases and violence. This was all permitted due to the United Fruit Company's abusive contracting system, where they would contract workers via third-party companies, a loophole that would dissolve them of any legal blame for breaching Colombia's labour laws. When workers expressed their demands to the head of the UFC in Colombia, Thomas Bradshaw, he would simply dismiss them with the excuse that they were not UFC employees, as under this loophole they technically weren't. When they eventually struck, Bradshaw expressed his concern over the situation to Colombian President Miguel Abadia Méndez, who then sent army troops to the region in order to prevent the strikers from blocking the railroad trade route. Just as with the Tropical Oil Company strike incident, the results were fatal. thousands of strikers were fired upon at once. According to some eyewitness accounts, bodies were allegedly then loaded onto trains before being disposed into the sea. Despite government records minimizing the scale of violence, the incident became infamous around the country after Liberal Congressman Jorge Eliezer Gaitan conducted an investigation into the massacre, concluding and making it public that the Colombian president and the National Army were responsible for the deaths. He was also highly critical towards US companies in the country, stating that they were carriers of death and destruction. Gaitan's outspokenness on such matters would soon transform him into a beloved national figure, particularly among the working class. Eventually, this popularity would lay the foundation for his future presidential campaigns, but more on that later.